But there is more to policing than that. If I was to talk to my own constituents, as I'm sure you will see with your own constituents as well, and say, what do you want from the police? People will say, well, you've got to catch criminals. But people would also say, but we want to feel safe in our communities. We want to see the police around and to feel reassured by their presence. And an intelligence-driven approach to policing is different from a reassurance-driven approach to policing in the way in which you allocate resources and handle time. And there is a legitimate debate, I think, about the balance between those two things. But also, I think people would say, and actually, interestingly, in my constituency, I see this as a result of neighbourhood policing. If I was to speak to constituents, if I was to speak to police officers and say, what do you think the priority is around, for example, young people and crime? People would say, well, it's really important that people, young and old, can feel safe in the streets, can walk in the parks, there's proper lighting, that you feel safe. People would also say, but there's got to be decent places for young people to go after school and at the weekends, because if not, they'll get into difficulty. And let's make sure that we tackle problems before they emerge in criminal behaviour, whether that's through family intervention projects to make parents face up to their responsibilities, or through targeted youth intervention to make sure young people at risk don't go down the wrong track. And again, in tackling crime, there is a debate about how much time police should be spending catching the criminals and how much time they should be making sure that young people don't become criminalised in the first place, in which there is an important role for police alongside other partners in their local community. So there is a legitimate set of debates to be had about the purpose of policing. There's secondly a legitimate debate to be had about the use of resources. I don't know whether you discussed this this morning. There's no doubt to my mind that while there is scope for efficiency savings within policing. That was clear in the HMIC report done on these issues. It was clearly taken on board by Alan Johnson as Home Secretary in government, and then as Shadow Home Secretary, that the up to 12% savings over 4 years, which had been spelt out, could be done through greater collaboration, through national procurement, through some changes in recording in overtime. But I do think we are in a materially different place from where we hoped to be 6, 7, 8 months ago. First of all, because we have a settlement not of 12% in central grant, but a 20% cut, with a Home Office which has suffered disproportionately compared to schools, health or defence, and with policing substantially exposed within that settlement. Secondly, because in that report from HMIC, these were difficult changes which would allow savings building up over a 4-year period, not front-end loaded in the way in which the savings are being asked for. And we've already seen from some of the announcements from individual police forces, it is very difficult, and I know that every chief constable and every police authority will be trying to avoid. This is very difficult to see how these savings can be made without substantial reductions in the number of police officers as well as community support officers and other staff available for policing. That is the reality of where we are. I have to say I'm very cautious, and you will know more about this than me, about the idea that we should make ourselves feel better because of the expectation of substantial rises in the police precept. The independent new economic forecaster has not forecast a rise in council tax on the level in the budget documentation. What they've done is they've taken past rises in the police precept and said, and in council tax, and said if they were to carry on into the future on the same basis, this is the kind of rise in precept you might see. That's a very different issue from actually, and especially after a first year of freeze, councillors then deciding in their local community, and at a time when local government itself is also seeing very substantial reductions, deciding to carry on with that same level of precept rise into the future. What we also know from the analysis which has been done is that even if that rise in precept were to occur consistently across the country, it would deliver very, very different outcomes for different police forces up and down the country because of the very different levels of dependency some police forces have on the council tax compared to others. So the fact is we have a very substantial front-end loaded reduction in the available resources for policing, and this is going to be a challenge for all of you to deal with, and a challenge which we will, I think, rightly highlight. I think one of the debates which we need to be very clear about, though, is this issue about visible policing, because during this period where I've been observing this debate, I've been worried by the discussion about visible policing. There is a second HMIC report which is regularly quoted as saying that only 11% of police time at any one time, of all of our police, only 11% of them are visible at any one time. And the conclusion drawn from that is, too often, I fear, that must mean that 89% of the time, police officers are engaged in things other than visible policing. Bureaucracy, form filling, time wasting. Actually, if you look at the HMIC report, that isn't not what that report says at all. What the report says is that, yes, at any one time, 11% of police officers are on the street, but of the remaining 89% of them, over half of them at any one time are involved in non-visible but important operational police responsibilities, CID, traffic, control, domestic violence, all the many other non-visible but vital operational police functions. And then of the other half or so of the 89%, about 1.7% of the time is police officers who are sick or on holiday, and the rest of the time is those police officers who are at any one time off shift. Now, I have to say, I don't think we should move away from a shift system, although there's almost certainly changes which can be made. I certainly don't think that policing which is not visible is therefore non-operational or non-valuable. I do think we need to be clear in this debate about funding and resourcing whether or not cuts are going to impact upon operational policing, yes or no. But to simply say our commitment is to preserve visible policing, I think is to run grave risks with some of the very many vital functions that operationally police are performing on a daily basis to catch criminals, to tackle organised crime, to perform those many other functions, and also to be off shift for part of the time. And I do think it's important to have a rational debate here. The idea that only 11% of police time is visible, and therefore the other 89% is wasted, bureaucratic, and should be tackled, I think is a great slur on the reality of policing in our country. And I don't think that politics should get into those kind of debates. The third area where I think I said we need to look at is questions around the landscape of policing and organisation. We made substantial progress in recent years around the organisation of neighbourhood policing. I think neighbourhood policing, in my view, has been a massive success. But I certainly wouldn't say we'd reached the end of the road in terms of improvement. Have we, in every community, really managed to embed that partnership between police, youth services, social services, schools, health and parents, and to make the other services really responsible to the needs of policing, and sometimes policing responsive to the needs of parents, schools or other services? I think there was more to do in neighbourhood policing. And similarly, at those areas which go beyond the locality, beyond even the force, around organised crime and counter-terrorism, I think the work which was done and initiated by John Reid was a substantial improvement, but certainly there are issues there to look at in terms of the way we organise counter-terrorism policing. And we welcome the debate about the National Crime Agency as well. Is the links between soccer and the police really as good as they could be? I think that's a question, and I think it's right we have a debate about that in the run-up to the white paper. But I think that takes me to my fourth point about trust and accountability, because first of all, on that local point, are we really sure that we have effective local accountability at the Met or BCU level for ensuring that the police can demand other services deliver for them, or vice versa, other services getting the support they need from police, a proper accountable relationship there which responds to the views of individual communities? I don't think that we would say we'd reach an optimal position. When it comes, though, to those issues which go beyond the force level, I do have substantial concerns about what's being proposed. One of the things I learned in government is that it's good to have agencies, a bit arm's length from ministers, who are there to deliver outcomes on behalf of government. But it is really important in accountability terms to make sure you get your accountabilities right and clear and focused. If there's a way in which, through the National Crime Agency, we can have effective focus, an accountable focus on tackling organised crime, which supports forces working in a collaborative way together, then that's a good thing. But I really do not understand how abolishing the NPIA and throwing into a crime agency also responsibility for the police computer or the DNA database or police training would add to accountability. It seems to me it would take us completely in the wrong direction. I faced an issue when I was in education. We had one agency which was both setting exams and then ensuring exam standards were met. And we split them apart. And we made two different agencies, one independent and reporting directly to Parliament. We demanded they had the same back office support, located in Coventry, the same personnel, but it was better to have clarity of accountability. You set the exams, you're accountable for that. You regulate the exams and are independently accountable for standards. I think it's always dangerous in an ideological drive in some ways to just want simply to reduce the number of quangos, to try to roll different functions into one place. I think if that happens with the National Crime Agency, that would be a very substantial step backwards in the way in which we have support services for police on the one hand and focus on organised crime on the other. And that's an area where we'll want to look very closely at the legislation. And then, of course, the other issue is independent police commissioners. I regret that Vernon and I weren't able to come to your session this morning. I was at the Home Affairs Select Committee organised. Vernon and I were both there. Some of you may have been there as well on Monday, in which case you heard me make a similar speech to this, for which I apologise. But we were at a seminar Monday morning with some members of police authority, some chief constables. And I said that I wanted to do opposition in a responsible way. And I wanted to understand the issues. But so far, in 2 months doing the job, I hadn't yet managed to find a single person involved day-to-day in operational policing who supported the idea of an individual elected police commissioner. And if there was anybody in the room who did, if they could subtly see me afterwards, they didn't need to put their hand up, would have been difficult in that audience, but to subtly identify themselves afterwards, I would love just to be able to arrange a meeting and have a discussion, because I need to understand the case for the elected police commissioner. And so far, I've not heard anybody who knows about policing make that case to me. Now, I know you had obviously the minister this morning and somebody from a think tank, but I don't know yet whether there was anybody who is operationally involved in policing, either accountability through a police authority or through operational policing, who does support that case. As I said, there's no need to put your hand up, but Vernon and I would love to meet you just to understand these issues, because when I look across that piece, those 4 areas where I identified as being important for the next stage of reform, I don't really understand how independent individual election of a police commissioner helps us, and I fear that in each one of these areas, it has a risk of taking us substantially backwards.